So a few reminders on your clinical observations as well as your clinical report that hopefully you're thinking about because it is due after spring break. I'll take you through the resources that are on ReggieNet. So if you come to your home page for the section you are in for 210, just click on Resources and Materials. And as I've shown you before, here are all the folders we have for the course. And if you go to the Observations and Clinical Report folder, here I have it opened. Within it you'll find two different folders. You'll find the Clinical Report Section 1, which gives you some examples of the clinical reports that you will be writing and turning in, as well as the Observations folder. I'm going to take you through the Observations folder first because these are all the materials you will need for actually conducting the observations you do in Metcalf and U-High. So the documents you have to have when you're conducting these observations are here the observation log as well as the cover sheet. You'll just need to print out one observation log that you will use for all of your observations, and you will need a cover sheet for each one of your observations. So that might mean you need 9 if you're doing 9 1-hour observations, or it might mean you need 6 of them depending on how long your observations are. So if you open up the observation log, you'll find this blank document that basically you just need to fill in. So make sure you include your name and my last name, and then you can delete these or just add to it. But here's an example of if you went on January 29th, your observation began at 10:20 a.m., it ended at 11:10. And you can round up. So if it's 40, and actually I'm going to say if it's 40 minutes or beyond, it can count as an hour. And you will do the class you observed. And at U-High, you will need a faculty signature. At Metcalf, you will not. And if by chance you forget this log, just make sure you have the faculty sign your actual observation notes or somewhere where I can see documentation of that. You do not need the teacher at Metcalf to sign your form simply because it's a lot harder to grab their attention because they have a lot going on in the classroom and there aren't as clear markers of when the sessions begin or end. So you just need to make sure you sign in at the school to have documentation of that. You then can open the document that is the cover sheet for each clinical observation, and this just helps me differentiate between your notes and what class you are observing. So make sure you fill out, you can just print it out and then write in all of the information up top and just circle which number of observation it is for either U-High or Metcalf. Now I know some of you have actually been taking notes directly on this form, and that's fine. Just make sure you have enough space to take all of the memos or information down that you need as you're observing. So one of the documents that will really help you think about what you're looking for and will record during your time in the classroom is the things to look for document that you'll find in the folder, and especially for your first couple of observations, this will take you through all of the different domains of development to think about what you might be writing down. So for instance, when you're looking at students' physical development, you might be recording information on their height, weight, body shape, any issues of obesity. You might be talking about levels of puberty, also fine and gross motor skill development. So anytime in the classroom you see students using, if they're walking or running, or kind of their precision with handwriting, all of those things can be documented under physical development. For cognitive development, it gives you some ideas of what you might be, questions you might be asking about the class. Issues related to Piaget, Vygotsky, behaviorism, anything that would be related to how students are learning or demonstrating what they have learned. It's important to think about cognitive development both from how the teacher is guiding the learning as well as how children and students are taking in that learning or demonstrating that learning. So make sure that you're getting all of that, and whether or not students are learning through groups or just through hands-on independent discovery, all of that would be important information. As well as when we talked about the model of information processing, thinking about how teachers help students remember information, gain attention, in storing using working memory by processing directions, or by storing it in long-term memory or drawing upon that long-term memory. For social and emotional development, the types of interactions you see in the classroom, emotional states, how much children can control their emotions, even what types of emotions are displayed, whether they be basic or social, even thinking about children smiling, thinking about their temperaments. Does the child seem shy? kind of their energy levels, all of those things could be recorded. For motivation, there will be large differences between Metcalf and U-High for what you see in students being engaged in the work that they are doing, as well as record as much as you can about the classroom environment. So even things that are on the wall, think about just the environment of the attachment in the classroom of the students and the teachers, what type of relationship they have, the setup of the classroom. Is it, are they in lines looking at the board? Are they in groups? Think about classroom management and levels of student participation. So all of these things can be recorded. I know a couple of you have asked me about if you have to use these different categories when you're recording what you see, and you absolutely do not have to, but I just find it easier to break up my paper into these different categories so that I can make sure that I'm recording information on all of these areas of what you see in the classroom. The other document that might help you as you're taking notes is really understanding the difference between an observation and an inference. Oftentimes I will have students turn in notes that really focus more on their takeaway or making judgments about what's going on, but really you're trying to record the raw information that you see. That means direct observations and not making assumptions about what those observations mean. So this document helps take you through what is an inference and what is actually an observation, because when I do go to grade your notes, if you're only recording inferences and not direct observations, then you will not be getting full credit for that portion of the assignment. So for instance, one example here is, during the lecture, Jenna seemed bored and uninterested, versus down here an observation would be like, during the lecture, Jenna stared at the ceiling for 2 minutes at a time, took no notes, and looked at the clock 12 times. So we can't really assume or infer that she was bored or uninterested. We could, but for these notes, what's important is for you to really record actually what Jenna was doing. Now, when you go to use these notes, we're not going to use names in them, so you would just talk about a girl and maybe describe what she was wearing. You won't be using names, but you will be recording exactly what students do. Now that you've started doing actual observations in the schools, it's important to think about how you're going to use those observations to compile your first section of your clinical report. So I do have a folder here that will help you with this. If you open up that folder, there are 4 documents. The first one is the template that you can use to help you piece together and organize your observation notes and apply the theories. And then I have 3 examples of student work that they've turned in for this first section of the clinical report. Be careful if you are reading these are very helpful. Just make sure that you do not steal any of their wording or specifically lift any of their work for your own, because that is plagiarism. So it's a way to help you guide thinking about how you will put together your own report, but just make sure that you are not using their ideas. So I will open up the template here. And on the template, it basically, anything in black you can keep, and the red is where you will add in information, or it just helps give you some directions on this report. So the first section is just covering physical development and then the cognitive theorists that we studied. So the first page will just include your first name and last name and your section number, whether you are in section 6 or section 11. And remember that this document is in APA format, and you can use any of the headings. Now, the first section should be around, as you can see here, 5 to 7 pages. I am not going to take off points if you go over that limit, but please just be as economical as you can in your wording, because I have to read a lot of these. So really you can fully complete this report in 5 to 7 pages and get full credit. And I know some people go over that, that's fine, but it can be done in 5 to 7 pages. Less than 5 pages, I'm yet to see a student that has adequately reported in all of the sections. So if you have under 5 pages, you probably need to readdress whether or not you've completely fulfilled the requirements for this. So here, there should be some type of brief introduction. So to talk about the fact that you are going to be covering physical and cognitive development in this report. So just a brief introduction to invite me into your report. Then you will start with physical development, and this is usually about 1.5 pages. in thinking about contrasting puberty, in thinking about contrasting activity level, fine and gross motor skill development. So make sure you are in the section recording at least 3 different developmental levels. You do not have to provide an example in each one of these, but let's suggest that you were in a 3rd grade classroom and you noticed that the students were developing much greater fine motor skill development in the way in which they were able to write and stay within the lines. You might contrast that if you were in like a kindergarten classroom and how they were really still just working on those fine motor skills in being able to write within lines or even being able to form the actual letters. Down in the cognitive development, so to have just a brief introduction about what cognitive development actually means. I know that I've taught all of you this and I know what cognitive development means, but for this report you need to display for me that you know exactly what that is. You'll then go into behaviorism and social learning, so think about what you can include there about how we use rewards or incentives or punishment, as well as how there might be social learning theory involved in modeling in the way in which children are learning material in the classroom. And remember, for that you're also thinking about the different developmental levels and how that looks differently and how we use behaviorism or social learning across those grade levels. For Piaget's theory of cognitive development stages, this has always been the most challenging for students because they say they don't see anything related to Piaget in there, and that's fine. You just need to let me know exactly what Piaget's position was on how students learn cognitively or the cognitive development across the stages. And then if it was absolutely absent in the classroom, you can record that as well. So for instance, we know that Piaget believed in constructivism and a lot of self-discovery. So you might suggest that there were a lot of materials that you saw in the room, but children were actually not really using them in a way to explore and really develop their own knowledge. So you can say that, you know, the setting was there and it was possible, but you didn't actually see that. Although you might see many aspects of Piaget's learning, and I think when I go through student notes, there are moments that they just don't recognize that it's there. For instance, learning new words, do they first assimilate and then accommodate? Are you drawing on prior knowledge? All of these things are related to Piaget's ideas. Vygotsky is usually the strongest section of student writing. And this has to do with all of the scaffolding and thinking about the zone of proximal development for students. So even think about how we watched Jack Black in School of Rock and thinking about how you documented all the different moments of sociocultural theory. Make sure you describe the theory and its main components at the very beginning so that I know that you know what the concepts are, and then apply them to what you see. And always contrasting against the different levels. Then information processing and problem solving is the last one. Think about from the book in those sections, thinking about grabbing attention of students and thinking about the model of how information actually gets remembered by students. At the end, you will need to include the reference of Bergen and Bergen 2012, and anytime you're using information from the textbook, you need to be citing them throughout your document. At the very end here, it gives you the rubric for how these will be scored, so make sure you go through, and if you do want full credit on all of these different sections, make sure that you are adhering to all of these standards for what exemplary work looks like. And here's just one example of the student work that I've uploaded on ReggieNet, just showing you exactly some of the different examples they used and how they talked about the different theories in incorporating them in the report. So this can be really helpful to think about, including, like for instance, B.F. Skinner was mentioned there, even referencing the main theorists and what their ideas were about development. So hopefully that helps you. This folder does contain everything you will need to complete the assignment. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I'm always happy to read any drafts you have of the clinical report and give you feedback.